Welcome back to FudgeMuppet, I'm Scott, and today we are going to be picking on one of our favourite games of all time, Skyrim. We absolutely adore Skyrim, if you couldn't tell by the hundreds of builds and videos we've made for it, but today we are going to have an in-depth look at the lore and what Skyrim muddled up, or at the very least, chose not to implement something that was really cool. Today we are going to be talking about the true Nordic Pantheon. The Nords historically didn't believe in the exact same gods as the Imperials. In Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the Nords worshipped the typical Imperial Pantheon, including Akatosh, Kinnereth, Julianos, etc., all those. However, this is not the traditional Nordic worship that lasted for thousands of years. The Nords, for most of their history, have been quite patriotic and staunch in their own independent beliefs, so why did it all change by the time of Skyrim? As a scapegoat, this could be a change that occurred in the 200 years between the events of Oblivion and Skyrim, perhaps as an effort to consolidate a stronger imperial culture among the Nords to strengthen the weakening empire, or the stories about how Martin Septim became an avatar of Akatosh so he could defend Tamriel from Mehrunes Dagon during the Oblivion crisis. But let's for a second assume that a religion that has stood for thousands of years did not simply disappear in 200. To be fair, there are references to Shor and Kyne and other nods to gods here and there, but these are often just like little Easter eggs. In the Nordic Pantheon, Akatosh is not the head of the gods. In fact, he isn't even one of their gods at all. If anything, the Nords associate Akatosh with Alduin the World Eater. I mean, if you look into the history of the Nords, it doesn't exactly make a whole lot of sense that after the dragon cult escapades and the human rebellion, that a dragon god would be their chief deity. I mean, Akatosh is a hybridized version of Auriel, the chief elven god, and we all know how the Nords feel about the elves. The head of the Nordic Pantheon is in fact Shor, the Nordic version of what others call Lorkhan or Shazar. Shor is the king of the gods and god of the underworld. His realm is Sovngarde, the afterlife of the Nords. He is the bloodthirsty warrior king that fought and would lead the Nords to victory over their Aldmeri oppressors. He was the top dog of the gods until he was killed by the elven gods and had his heart ripped out. His wife was the goddess Kyne, known as Kinnereth by Imperials, though many Nords would consider Kinnereth as nothing but a pale shadow of what Kyne is. Kyne is the goddess who leads souls to Sovngarde. She is the mother of men and is credited with teaching the Nords the way of the voice, granting them the Thum. She was mentioned a few times in Skyrim, such as the Kyne Sacred Trials quest, but outside of that, she's mostly just called Kinnereth. Now, you may be wondering why this is such a big deal, and to be quite honest, it's not. You can rationalize the Imperial Pantheon as the dominant religion in Skyrim, but the Nordic Pantheon was so much cooler for the Nords. It's what sets them apart from the other races. It defines their culture, the warring barbarians of the frozen north. Imagine if you get hit with Elder Scrolls 6 elsewhere, and all they do is worship the 8 divines instead of their cat gods. They too are interpretations of the same entities, but the interpretation is incredibly important because it is what defines their culture. Here are some examples of why the Nordic Pantheon is so much cooler. If you look at Stendarr, he should be Stun, the Nordic version, who was believed to be a god of ransom, who taught the Nords to take prisoners of war and the benefits of doing so. Interestingly enough, Stendarr is seen as the god of mercy in the Imperial Pantheon, but you can see that mercy in the Nordic Pantheon has an interesting spin on taking prisoners and bargaining them back for a reward. Technically, that is a kind of mercy, but you can see how that makes them fundamentally different. It's all war-focused. Stun is a personification of Nordic culture, rather than having a foreign mercy god called Stendarr. Once again, I'm not saying that the Imperial religion being dominant in modern Skyrim isn't plausible. I'm just saying that it is both more unlikely and not as cool. They could have even done both. For example, you could have had a civil war as the stage for a religious war. I mean, it already is about the whole Talos worship thing, but imagine if all the Stormcloaks were far more traditional, and their pantheon was the Nordic one with Shor and Kyne, whereas the Imperial-affiliated holds could have adopted the Imperial Pantheon more strongly. But to make it so that the entire province of Skyrim just accepted the Imperial Pantheon is kind of far-fetched. But let's keep looking. Sun, the god of trial against adversity, was shown in Skyrim, guarding the Whalebone Bridge to the Hall of Valor in Sovngarde. This was really cool, but once again, barely any mention of him in the entire land of Skyrim. He is part of the Nordic Pantheon and is of great importance. Mara and Dibella are very much the same as their Imperial Pantheon counterparts, but Arkea is one that's quite different. As the Nords would call him Orki, he is the god of mortality. He's also a bit of a douche and is seen as an enemy god of the Nords. There's this whole legend about how the Nords had similar lifespans to elves, but then Orki sent Alduin to cut their lives short. He's also seen as the patron god of the orcs. He's essentially combined aspects of Malakath and Arkay into one entity, yet there is barely any mention of Orki, and instead they worship Arkay. Seems bland by comparison. There is also a version of Julianos called Junal and Hermaeus Mora called Hermamora, though we did hear of that briefly with the Skull in the Dragonborn DLC. Another big one is the use of the name Talos. In the Nordic Pantheon, Ysmir is the name given to Tiber Septim by the Greybeards when they recognized him as Dragonborn, hence the Nords revere him as Ysmir. I remember in Oblivion being told by a Nord in Bruma about Ysmir, the Dragon of the North. Ysmir is barely ever mentioned in Skyrim, mainly being referred to as his name of Talos, as it is in the Imperial Pantheon. Wrap-up point here is that Skyrim neglected the Nordic Pantheon and just threw in the Imperial Pantheon, which is a bit of a shame because the Nordic Pantheon really is quite interesting and really captures the feel of the hardy, honor-driven, warring Nords. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video if you enjoyed and subscribe for more Elder Scrolls content just like this. I'm Scott and I will see you next time.